So I only had one question for today's live, and that was on pelvic tilts and whether you should stay engaged throughout the pelvic tilt or relax in between. So let's go through those a couple of times just so that everybody is aware on how to do these pelvic tilts. So I'm just going to come down and get into the correct sort of position. So a couple of things to start with is if this area of your back is off the ground and your sacrum or your tailbone is kind of like your forward of it, I want you to try and work on both of those areas to start with. So to begin with, I want you to kind of rock forward and back with your pelvis until you're on the center of your tailbone or your sacrum there. Okay, so what that should mean is that there's a very, very tiny gap just at this lower part of your back here. But what we don't want is we don't want a gap up here. So this is like the bottom of our rib cage. We don't want that area off the ground. So what happens when that area is off the ground, it means our back is automatically firing and our ribs are already working. So when we do something like pelvic tilts, can you see how much my back is working with that? And this position puts a lot of pressure down, and that's what we don't want. So even before we start, let's make sure we are set up correctly, and this is the same for any exercise, especially on our back. So I want you to inhale, exhale, and bring that back and shift so that that back is on the ground, but there's still that very little gap here in the lower area. So you're in the middle of your sacrum, the bottom of your rib cage is down, okay? If you cannot get that bottom of the rib cage down, you need some work on your thoracic work, and that's in the foundational program under strength and stretch, or if you're doing the 8-week progression, it comes in week 4. So if you can't get that right now, what I want you to do is I want you to find a rolled up towel and I want you to put it under your shoulders and your head. So basically under your, at about the area of your armpit, and lift it up. What that's going to do is it's going to help you rock and get that mobility in there, okay? So remember, bottom of our sacrum, bottom of our rib cage. All right, so now that you're set up correctly, what you're going to do is you're going to inhale, relax everything, but make sure your back doesn't go off the ground. It stays down on the ground. So you keep that sort of constant pressure. And then on the exhale, all you're doing is pulling up and rocking that lower back into the ground slightly. And then inhale and relax. So basically you're going from the middle of the weight being on the middle of the tailbone, so not forward of the tailbone and not back of the tailbone, but on the middle of the tailbone, and then you're rocking it to the back of the tailbone, like this. Okay, so that's all you're doing. And as you're rocking, we're trying to keep that bottom of the rib cage on the ground. And exhale, inhale, relax. Exhale, inhale, relax. Exhale. Okay, so you do relax in between. So basically, the inhale will relax the pelvic floor and bring you back to the middle of the sacrum. The exhale, you'll pull up and rock off the sacrum. Okay, so what I see, common issues I see is people nearly make it into like a glute bridge or something. They're like really squeezing the glutes. So they're inhaling, they're exhaling, and really rocking and squeezing and tucking, and even the bottom of the sacrum just about comes off. And then they inhale and exhale, inhale and exhale, okay? So we don't want this upper part rocking, we just want that lower bit working, okay? So we're really focusing on this area, and our glutes are actually not squeezing at all. It's not a glute bridge. It's all about just working that lower area backwards and forwards to get this little pelvic movement in here whilst keeping our bottom of our rib cage on the ground. Now, one thing I do want to note with this is if you have sciatica pain, this exercise may trigger some of it, because what we're doing by tucking under, we're tucking our tailbone under, which if we think of this as our pelvic floor, so these are our pelvic floor muscles and this is our tailbone. As we tuck under, we tighten the back of our pelvic floor muscles. So our tailbone going under squishes or makes the room where that sciatic nerve goes in less. So as we come under with our tailbone, that room gets less, and if you're also tight in other areas of the pelvic floor, that may pinch that sciatic nerve and cause some issues. So if you do find that you're like, this one doesn't work so well for me, don't worry about it. You can just skip over that exercise and just work on standing and pulling up and down, or even little, if you're ready, actually just grab a ball or something so that you're up higher, and just little pelvic tilts. But if you have sciatic pain, you're actually going to want to think about a little bit more about that pelvic, that tailbone pushing up versus tucking under. And if you have that sciatic pain, this is awesome as well if you're pregnant, because we don't want to tuck that tailbone under. So if you're sitting, you want to make sure you're sitting on your sit bones, not back on your tailbone, because that is one of the key ways of getting that sciatic pain as we're pregnant. Because we sit back and we relax like this, we squish that tailbone under, and then think if you're in an office for like 8 hours and you're sitting and you're always squishing that under, it's really tightening into that area, and that's going to cause some sciatic pain. So make sure you're sitting on your tailbones. Pelvic tilts, it's a really small movement, so keep working on that, making it small, and making sure the bottom of the rib cage stays on the ground, and it's just that little pelvic tilt that you're working on. It's not a big movement, and yes, you relax in between each one so the pelvic floor relaxes, and then basically you pull up the pelvic floor and you think of pulling up that pubic bone just slightly, enough to rock off and over that tailbone there, and then inhale so that you come back to that neutral point. And if it does trigger any sciatic pain, then just ignore this one and do some standing pelvic tilts or leaning on a ball or a chair or something if you're not ready for front loading. All right, I hope that helped, and let me know if you have any other questions.